Hello there. I'd like to begin by thanking Jean-Philippe and Thibault for inviting me to participate in this meeting. The meeting begins at such an important debate on the future of ageing in what must be said are increasingly difficult times. I'd also like to thank Alan for kindly commenting on the papers. I've always admired your work, Alan, and even though you might not agree with some of the things I'm going to be saying today. Much is well known about demographic change, and the people are living longer, and the numbers of older people relative to young ones is increasing. And this shift is usually expressed as primarily a demographic phenomenon with economic consequences. But it's also a cultural one. For societies to successfully respond, they need to engage in the task of cultural adaptation. And this is a sort of question about what sort of cultural adaptation should this be? Now, a good starting point would be to outline some of the implications of the active ageing agenda as a candidate for that act of adaptation, which within the European Union has evidenced a continuing tension between activity and productivity. And the 2012 year of active ageing and intergenerational solidarity is itself perhaps the latest turn in this ongoing policy discussion. Thibault and I have outlined the genealogy of this struggle in the paper that appeared in Journal of Human Relations. And there we argue that activity as a concept whose supporters promote its holistic qualities has been reduced to the far more restrictive notion of productive ageing, and that this has emerged as the principal discourse left to mature adults if they wish to achieve social legitimacy and a visible identity. Even the competing discourse on relations within the family has arguably become restricted to that of unpaid care work, as state-funded welfare becomes an increasingly endangered species, and potentially emancipatory concepts such as anti-ageism have withered to become an offshoot of non-discriminatory workplace practice. So such are the husks that we're left with after such optimistic beginnings in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly for critical gerontology. So, while the move towards active ageing and away from dependency is a huge cultural shift, we have to also ask, is the direction that we're going in now the right shift? First, I'd argue that there may be value in periodic withdrawal from social engagement and to the putting of life course time aside for peaceful reflection and critical analysis. Second, that activity in its shrunken cousin productive ageing may constitute a form of age-related colonisation which replaces one form of age-specific life course experience with that of another. Finally, that we should reconsider the role of life course-based rhythms, stages, or whatever you want to call them, as a platform from which to understand both cultural adaptation to a long life and effective forms of critique. So first then, the purpose of inactivity. Let's reassess the promise then of inactivity. One of the things that could be drawn out here are the degree to which active ageing can accommodate notions of what Tornstam has referred to as positive solitude, which he points out should not be confused with disengagement from life. Solitude and space for reflection are elements necessary for critical distance to be achieved. This is in stark contrast to what's been called the busy ethic by Eckhart and by Katz as busy bodies, both parodying activity as a means of adding moral value to lives that would otherwise be judged as being empty or without true substance. Contemporary culture is not very good at tolerating inactivity, even though this may constitute one of the main opportunities that used to be made available to later life. Without it, without that is space for sustained reflection, it's difficult for a considered critique of an existing state of affairs to take shape. Unreflective activity, more often than not, simply reproduces a more or less of type of debate around already established forms of conformity, more or less activity, more or less economic usefulness, and so on. It fails, in other words, to go beyond existing social and political priorities and to question the character of those arguments themselves. The potential contribution of the long life should not simply be added on to an existing set, but work towards the creation of a new grasp of the tremendous cultural opportunity that long life provides. Critical inactivity, then, as a symbolic space in which existing assumptions about aging can be scrutinised, should be positively encouraged. So let's celebrate reflection, creative solitude, and the room for critique, and not fill the gift of longevity with simple productivism that eclipses our existential capacities and our capacity for dissent. Second, I would argue that we need to recognise distinctive life priorities that contribute to intergenerational negotiation. Let's consider then the degree to which policy options take the special nature of late life into account. A key cultural reaction to this state of affairs has been, I'd argue, an attempt to deny old age by replacing it, as an experience, with the priorities from elsewhere. That is, at one and the same time, a form of restriction on the intrinsic potential of later life, and its replacement by imperatives from another part of the life course. In so doing, something essential about the experience of age has been covered up. And elsewhere I've referred to this as new aging or age imperialism. This perspective has implications for intergenerational relations, insofar as a number of commentators have suggested that intergenerational conflict is on the increase, at least in the public sphere, of which policy is a part. Defining social contribution as work exacerbates that trend by forcing different age groups to compete for the same identities in the same social space. By contrast, when younger generations are asked about provision for older adults, they appear to work on the logic that it's not resentment that they feel, but they need the opportunity to have the same rights themselves that determine this sense of solidarity that we see. Or frustration that there is not enough space for both work and care. With Lowenstein and Harpler, I've argued that recognising the distinctive experience of each generational group is key to developing cooperation between ages and the negotiation of a mutually compatible social policies. In contrast to forms of identity based on sameness, then, the idea, the key here for intergenerational solidarity is, paradoxically, to recognise the differences between priorities at the particular points in the adult life course under different social conditions. In other words, we must focus on distinctiveness and difference, and then people can come together to engage in complementary activities. Each part of the life course then enhancing the other rather than competing for the same place. The third and final point that I think we should seriously consider is how to build an understanding of the opportunities that a long life provides that does not simply depend upon economic instrumentalism. In other words, beyond thinking that says that you're only as valuable as your capacity to work. Work, that is, that does not take into account the changing existential priorities of the adult life course and the contribution that this can make to a wider understanding of later life. Here, it's proposed that we should begin to work with rather than against the rhythms of the life course, and that without this insight, active ageing is in danger of ignoring the forms of age-specific life priority. In this sense, active ageing would be unnatural insofar as it attempts to evacuate these natural forms of potential from consideration, and in so doing loses the particular qualities that a long life can teach us. I don't think this is to reduce later life to biological change, but to act as an antidote to a dominating discourse that has denied elements of everyday experience and desire, and is thereby in itself unnatural. And by this I'm particularly referring to the notion of productive ageing. Alternative rhythms would be more likely to be found in elements such as the impacts of bodily change and increased awareness that we do not live forever, and that we have a limited time in which to do the things that we want to do. The more of the same offered by productivist solutions cannot answer these desires, rather it seeks to suppress them. Sustainable solutions, ones that can stand the test of time and respect the life priorities of different generational groups, can then be negotiated once each party recognises their own and others' special contribution. True cultural innovation, then, would be the facilitation of new roles adapted to a long life course, greater attention to generational interconnection, discovering new ways of releasing age-specific potential. And it's this form of cultural adaptation that will maximise benefits to older citizens and identify their special contribution to wider society. Look, what I'm trying to say is that I think we've lost our way culturally by thinking of ageing almost exclusively in terms of active and productive activities. If we were to refocus on concepts such as creative inactivity, on the distinctive life priorities that a long life gives us, and the rhythms of the life course that are perhaps an alternative material base to that of economic instrumentalism, we'll begin to move this debate forward in a way which is telling us something not only about the potential of older people and their contribution to our societies, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. This is a role that social policy can adopt. It can look for how to create spaces where this creative reflection can take place, where distinctive life priorities can emerge, and where generations can cooperate and collaborate, not on the basis of all being the same, which leads inevitably to competition for the same place, but for recognising each other's distinctiveness, each other's special contribution to our life and our lifetimes. Well, there you have it. I hope that this provokes some debate. Good luck with the conference, and I hope to be there with you next time such an event is held. Bye now.